Good day, everyone. I am Sandy Perdon, and today, together with my group mates, we are going to discuss and identify the priorities and projects of indigenous studies as an academic field. So, here are the objectives of our discussion for today. So, examine the project in relation to indigenous studies. The second is discuss the central problem, issues, and aims of indigenous studies. The third is discuss the survey of indigenous studies initiatives. This is the introductions. Indigenous study is an academic field that emphasizes to the history, culture, governance systems, and social issues pertinent to the lives of indigenous peoples. It adopts an interdisciplinary approach, drawing knowledge from conventional disciplines such as anthropology, history, sociology, and law to facilitate integrated understanding of indigenous peoples. This field is underlined by respect for indigenous knowledge, community empowerment, and social justice principles. In the process of studying indigenous people, scholars inspired to contribute to the preservation of cultural heritage in tandem with addressing associated issues of marginalization and equality. Basically, yung indigenous studies ay pag-aaral sa mga katutubo kung ano yung history nila, kultura, pamumuhay, at mga kinaharap na problema. Pinagsasama-sama dito yung iba't ibang field tulad ng history, anthropology, sociology, para mas maintindihan natin yung pamumuhay ng mga katutubo. So, ang pinaka-propose ng study na ito is to i-preserve yung kultura ng mga indigenous people at matulungan sila laban sa inequality. So, sa madaling salita, this field is teach us to respect their knowledge and support their communities. Priorities of indigenous studies. The main focus of indigenous studies concern to the preservation of language, traditions, and cultural practice of indigenous people. Other important concerns are the self-determination and governance of indigenous people through representation in the decision-making process that affect their lives. Another is sustainable development, promoting projects and policies that respect indigenous ecological knowledge. Protecting the land rights and natural resources is a central concern because survival for communities as well as their culture depends on them. Yung priorities na sinasabi dito sa indigenous studies ay ay protektahan at i-preserve ang language, tradition at cultural practice ng mga katutubo. Pangalawa ay bigyan sila ng kakayahang magdesisyon para sa sarili nila. Kasi tulad nga ng nakaraang reporters, dahil sa kolonyalismo, nawalan sila ng kakayahang magdesisyon para sa sarili nila at maging sa kanilang komunidad. Pangatlo ay pangalagaan ng kanilang lupain at natural resources kasi doon nakadepende yung pamumuhay nila at mga kultura nila. Project in indigenous studies. The project in indigenous studies depends on the needs and context of one community. Common initiatives came from the rituals and traditional knowledge to ensure cultural preservation. To education-based project integrating more indigenous knowledge into school, curricular, and community-run educative programs. The policy-oriented projects aim to influence government policy to better protect the rights of indigenous peoples. Environmental projects, often at a community level, center on sustainable practices, align with the indigenous knowledge concerning the natural resources base. Each program designates the collaboration between academics and indigenous communities necessary for appropriate and effective outcomes. Pagdating sa indigenous studies, iba-iba ito depende sa pangangailangan ng isang komunidad. Kasi may mga proyekto na tungkol lamang sa preservation ng cultural nila, tulad ng pagre-record ng rituals at traditional knowledge. Meron din mga proyekto na educational programs na sinasama yung indigenous knowledge sa school. So mayroon din mga programs na or projects na tumutulong gumawa ng mga patakaran para protektahan yung mga natural resources kung saan yun ang kinabubuhay ng mga katutubong mamamayan.
This project fits into indigenous studies because it helps protect and record the traditional farming practices of indigenous people in Bicol, while learning how they plant, harvest, and care for the land. Researchers can preserve important cultural knowledge and support sustainable ways of living. It also empowers communities by recognizing that their ancestral methods are valuable and worth protecting. Example, researchers visit a Bicol tribe to document how they grow native rice using natural fertilizers. This information is then used to teach younger community members and to promote eco-friendly farming in the region. The main problems in indigenous studies came from the long history of colonialism, land loss, and discrimination that indigenous people still face today. These issues lead to poverty, unfair treatment, and the slow disappearance of traditional cultures and knowledge. At the heart of it is the struggle for self-determinations, the right of indigenous community to control their own lands, culture, and future because their voices are often ignored and mainstream. Many decisions are made without considering their needs or rights. Indigenous study looks at the main issues that many indigenous communities still face today. One major issue is land and resource rights, because many indigenous groups do not have full legal control over their ancestral lands. Another issue is socioeconomic inequality. Many indigenous people experiences higher poverty, limited access to good education, healthcare, and basic services. There is also the challenge of cultural and knowledge preservation. Traditional languages, stories, and practices are slowly disappearing because of outside influences and past policies that push indigenous people to abandon their culture.
Hello everyone, I am Angeline Villarante. I'm of Indigenous Studies. Indigenous Studies aims to understand the problem indigenous people face and help solve them. It works to protect their culture, support their rights, and help their communities grow and develop. Decolonization and empowerment. Tinutukoy ang mga katutubo na magkaroon ng kontrol sa kanilang mga kwento, karapatan, at kinabukasan sa pamamagitan ng pag-alis ng mga hindi na makatarungang sistemang iniwan ng kolonyalismo and acknowledge revitalization. Pinapangalagaan ang mga wika at tradisyonal na kaalaman ng mga katutubo at ginagamit ito sa education, pangangalaga sa kalikasan at iba pang larangan. Advocacy for rights. Pagtataguyod at pagprotekta sa mga karapatan ng mga katutubo upang masigurong tunay na nirerespeto at ipinatutupad ang mga ito. Policy reform. Pagpapabuti ng mga batas at patakaran ng gobyerno para mas maunawaan at masuportahan ang pangangailangan ng mga komunidad ng katutubo. Capacity building. Pagtulong sa mga katutubo na makapagtayo ng sariling paaralan at institusyon na nakaayon sa kanilang kultura at pagbibigay ng magandang oportunidad para sa kanilang kinabukasan. Survey in Indigenous Studies Initiatives. Many groups around the world are working to help indigenous communities. UNESCO protect indigenous in culture in the Philippines. The NCIF create rules and program to protect indigenous people and support their right to govern themselves. School and universities also help by studying indigenous traditions, help practices and ways of leadership. All of these efforts show that governments, school, and communities are working together to protect indigenous people and keep their culture alive. Conclusion. Indigenous studies help protect the culture, right, and acknowledge of indigenous people. It supports their communities, strengthens their voice, and guide the government in making fair policies. By working together with indigenous communities, researchers make sure their work in respect and truly helpful. That's all. Thank you.